on this computer. All right. So my name is Esteban Herron. I am a member of the Crown Heights Tenant Union in Brooklyn, New York, here with my colleague Mitch, and also our colleague Charlene, who is just attending right now. But we want to get started with just like some real quick introductions. I'd say probably your name. To start out with, I want to talk a little bit about why we want to do research in the first place and what we can do with that research. So just to like lay out like what we're looking at and like the terrain before we start getting into like real super nitty gritty details. There are things that are going to be universal. And so we'll talk about like, you know, how do you look at like how do you look at a deed and figure out the stuff that you need to know about a landlord that way. As someone mentioned, like social media, and I think Mitch is going to talk about being the Google master, because like Mitch actually does research for a living and like uses probably Google more than anything else. So like you'd be surprised at what you can actually figure out that way. So we're going to do the why, the how being the tools that we might be able to use to do that, and then we're going to give you some examples of like the way that we've researched some landlords or developers here in New York, and then yeah, and go from there. We want this to be as interactive as possible because this, you know, we want it to be a resource. Like I probably won't be able to tell you exactly who is behind an LLC like right now, but also like, you know, like we can help set you up with that information, you know, after the session. So to get started, is that laid out well, Mitch? Are you? We're also going to do like, I'm going to give you some like basic power mapping skills to so that you can take it back to your union and sort of decide like, you know, why is it important to that this person be targeted and this one not. This is all stuff that'll come out of the research. So so speaking of, the reason, at least for me, that I started doing research was like very basically like I needed to know who had power and who was able to get me what I needed. In my case, it was who was my landlord, was it different than my management company, and what would like what are the kinds of things that would make them mad and make them, you know, like actually pay attention. And it made all the difference, because instead of having to do like a series of escalations and like a demonstration here and like a, you know, a press release there, we looked, we actually used primarily social media to figure out that like my landlord really responded very negatively to any sort of publicity, like super strong like negative response to media. And so we went to like literally a single TV station that's like a local station, Brooklyn News 12, and made sure that they were coming out to like an action where we had literally just 10 people one morning outside of the landlord's office. And it was amazing that it like that something so like simple and easy that really didn't take that long to organize or to put together just changed the entire trajectory of how like our local campaign was going. Like the buildings got sold as a result of this like one little segment on the Brooklyn News 12, right? So so it showed, you know, it showed me that there was like you can organize smarter when you're doing good research, basically, and when you know who your target is and why. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Who your target is and why, and what they respond to and why. So yeah, so that's, you know, sometimes the targets are going to be a landlord, obviously. Sometimes it's going to be a management company, as Christy said earlier, a bank. Sometimes banks do have a lot of information that they don't necessarily share with you, but that they have access to. Another thing that I found in particular, like building research and landlord research, is important for litigation. Not everybody gets into like super heavy litigation, like taking landlords to court or filing affirmative cases against a landlord, but it is important to know because most likely you or some of your fellow tenants are going to end up in court. Like that's just part of part of what we do as tenant organizers. So so it's important to have that have a way to get that stuff. Generally, at least in New York, you don't get discovery when you're in housing court. So discovery basically has to be you. You have to do that work yourself. So that's one of the more valuable for me things in terms of research. And then in terms of basic organizing, some of the things that you will find out in the course of figuring out who owns a building or who has stake in that building, or how what other buildings, somebody mentioned this, what other buildings might be owned by the same landlord. I think that for us has probably been the single most critical part of growing a base, because it's just it becomes this exponential thing once you realize that there's 15 buildings owned by the same landlord, and all you have to do is just it's like a freebie, right? You already have your building organized. You can jump over to this building and say, join us, and the more buildings join a campaign or join the union as a local, we call them a local when they're one landlord. So I know that's a little different than what some other tenant unions do, but once you have that, you're actually in a position to make the landlord feel some pain. A rent strike would be devastating at that point when you have 15 buildings and you're all talking to one another. So for me, that's that's how you take the limited capacity that we all have, in terms of organizing. Most of us don't, most of us are volunteers. We don't do this as a job. So it's not like we have an unlimited amount of capacity. So this is, I think, how you maximize that capacity and try to grow the base of your union exponentially through this research. And then just winning, this is, I feel like you have to be able to do this research to be able to win significant things, whether it's with a landlord or whether it's through legislation or, whoever that target happens to be. You want to assess, once you know the things that you need to know, then you want to assess who has power in who has the power to give you what you're trying to get, whether it's a rent reduction or repairs or getting them sent packing to another state, which has happened too. So whatever it is that you want, you have to figure out how to put those things together. And I think one of the things for me that I'm excited to be able to do here is just have shared resources, and maybe we can think about putting start putting a document together with some of those shared resources that we could all share, with everyone else in ATUN or ATUN. I haven't quite figured out which one it is yet, but yeah, that's sort of a general primer on the why of research. Does anyone have any thoughts on that or questions about why we're focusing on research?
Yeah, rent on stack.
Yeah, well, so I didn't have necessarily a question about why, but I had some experience to share. You were talking about looking into these landlords and then finding that they own other properties, right? And trying to link those together for unionizing. Because that's actually how I got started, is I was trying to unionize my building and my neighborhood. And when I looked into that landlord more, I found essentially that company, through the management company that runs our building, the LLC that they are attached to, they essentially own our entire neighborhood, right? There is a whole interconnected network of buildings. And so, that's a very different situation, right? Because again, even if we could tend to unionize our one building, that would not have the same economic impact on them as if we could unionize essentially the entire neighborhood. And so, yeah, it's things like that that are often helpful to find out. But then it's also, it's hard to network across those sort of more spread out properties. So that's a challenge sometimes when we're working with this kind of information.
Cool, thanks. Nance, you're on stack. I hope I pronounced that right.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up. So you mentioned having to do your own discovery. So that's just something that I'm very interested in and frankly may need. So I didn't get to mention that with the intro. So thank you.
Cool, thanks.
Yes.
So
Oh,
Esteban.
just to clarify for folks, that's like the legal term discovery is when you're in court and you're granted like access to things that you wouldn't normally have access to. But on the flip side, you can do discovery essentially like what a private detective does, like staking somebody out and like figuring out where they live and so that's sort of what I meant by discovery. Like matching the sort of legal aspect of it. So, sorry, go ahead, Mitch.
Cool. Yeah, Esteban, I was gonna say, like, do you want to go into like power mapping? Because I think so. Like, we're not just like we're doing research to like accomplish a goal of like constructing a campaign against a landlord or against another target. So yeah, Esteban, do you want to speak about power mapping for a bit? For a few minutes?
Yes, absolutely. I'm gonna put a document here. Actually, maybe I'll just I'm gonna actually just share my screen so that you can get an idea of like. Now this is an exercise for court power mapping, but I want you to sort of just see like the structure, and then I'm gonna like send you home with some of these slides so that you can have access to that. Let's see here. All right. Can everybody see that? The New York Housing Court. Okay. So this is for anybody that's been dealing with the eviction moratorium stuff. This is where we're at in New York right now, which is essentially looking at how different judges are related to one another and who's in charge of who and what city agencies are in charge of what. So some of this isn't applicable necessarily to landlords, but it is, I mean, this is research. Like we spent a good bit of time like actually researching these like organizational charts. What I want to get to though is here. So you start to figure out who your targets are going to be. Here we've got like the Department of Social Services, we've got Civil Justice Coordinator, we have Right to Counsel in New York. So this is the office that we're trying to basically get them to slow down evictions, right? So once you identify these people, so this would be like you want to identify, for example, who's behind an LLC. And once you know who's behind the LLC, then you can figure out what you can do to get to them. To do that, so for example, with Stephen Banks, we went into LinkedIn. We found out that the chief judge of the like just housing courts in New York is married to the head of the Department of Social Services. This is important because the Department of Social Services deals with homelessness, and we're about to have a lot of homeless people. So this is not like a trivial matter. So we put them into this, which is one of the things I'm going to give you just like a blank version of. Kind of like I think mind mapping, brain mapping. There's like some apps that'll help you do like, do like little extensions of like of that target. And so you want to go like, once you do this is the research that we would be doing. So who they're connected to, who that person that they're connected to is connected to. And you'll start to find like just some really fascinating ways that you can reach targets that you didn't realize were possible, right? And so then you put all of that into a chart like this. Here's everybody that's on your side. Here's everybody that's against you. And here you get like a full visual of where, like, so in this context, you've got up here is the most power, down here is the least power, over here is the most on our side, over here is the most against us, right? So here we've got these like three judges that are very much against us, but also have the most power. And then these other judges that are a little bit closer to our side, but are not as powerful. And then, here probably I would draw a line between these two because they're married. So like, we did this we just did this exercise last week with like 50 people, and it was like eye-opening because everybody has a little tidbit about hold on, let me, everyone has a little tidbit about you know, like this is like a combination of lawyers and tenants and other organizations. Everybody has some connection or some like perspective that is useful here. This is a really great way to also to sort of like encourage participation in you know, if you're running a meeting or if you're trying to get more people like buy-in into a particular campaign or into you know, building up you know, a particular landlord's portfolio and just figuring out like, you know, how to get people pulled into the project. Like, I feel like this is really super useful. This really is like, it's 100% about how we build like tenant power. Like, and really that's like what we're doing in this, you know, what I feel like the purpose of something like ATUN is like, we can start doing this stuff on a scale that we've not been able to do it before. So that, for example, Achilles, who owns buildings here in Crown Heights for the last 2 or 3 years, who happens to have like if you start looking online, you see that there's a huge like organized contingent in Toronto that has been dealing with Achilles for 5 years, and then we have a whole other contingent in Sweden who's also been dealing with Achilles, who's actually gone to the UN and had like a declaration made against Achilles as like a slumlord, and like those sort of things are invaluable. Like the, you know, in terms of getting that, you know, press attention towards somebody, to just getting actual wins, like actual repairs, actual like rent reductions, all of those things. Like once you've figured out their scheme, and not everyone's going to be like Achilles or, you know, or Blackstone or, you know, some of the larger landlords. There's we'll talk a little bit later about how we found that there were, like in California, for example, people that were evicting a ton of tenants were also trying to build buildings in our neighborhood, like right across the street from me, right? And we found out a little bit too late. And that's where something like ATUN would have been like amazing to have had a few years ago when that was going on, because then we could have just like found somebody else who, you know, was dealing with them in California. And like, so these are, I think when we start talking about how we win like things like the cancellation of rent, that it's going to be like a, not just like a local effort, but it has to be like a national and an international effort. Like we have to be attacking landlords from every possible direction. That's where I think that that this research can really be like useful, and that I'm hoping that we can like connect on those levels. So again, sorry, like I'm breezing through this stuff, but if there's like, take a few questions right now in terms of this, like I'll put this in the chat for y'all to access. But does anyone have any questions about how we use research, or yeah, how we use this research to figure out who our targets are and how we get to them?
I guess I have a question. And sorry, my internet went out, so I was gone for a few minutes before you started this. So if you answered it already, my bad. So I really like the visual you made. I guess my question is, and maybe you're going to get into this, how did you identify all these people, and like how did you find that, like the judges, for example, in the town, like you got very specific with the people in power. How did you figure all this out?
Yeah, that's so most, I mean, of course, like New York has, I'd say both a really great and sometimes really not so great resources for government data. But even like whether it's a corporation or like a city or a town or a state, like they generally have these organizational charts somewhere on their website. You can go under, sometimes under like a, what is that called? A sitemap, like, and it shows you like links to everything. And like normally, like, I don't know if it's required by the state. I think the federal government does require that like every agency have like an organizational chart. And that's basically how we started. So like, and the organizational chart is just like a more complicated and less visually enticing version of what we do with power mapping. So I mean that's where I generally start. And Mitch is going to get into some of those tools, but yeah, that's at least in this case, that's how we started. And it does help if it's a city agency, or like if your targets are actually like government targets, because that's generally mandated. And if not, you can find that stuff out. Like you can always do like a full request, like a Freedom of Information Law request. If you can't find something on a website, you can basically just like request that they give it to you, and they'll have to email it to you or tell you how to get a hold of it. So yeah.
Cool.
So
Rand is on stack, and then Charlene.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you actually just covered at the last moment pretty much what I wanted to say, which is, yeah, it's a lot easier actually when you're looking into these people when they are government agents or officials, because like there are pretty strict requirements on those things. So a lot of time, if you just go to these people's websites or their offices, like they will have that information available. It's more like the private companies and the various sort of networks that they're working with that are harder to research, because like the public officials will almost always have some kind of office that you can contact, if nothing else. But that's why this power mapping is so important, right? Building, like working out this social network, is because, again, it might be easy to look up one of these judges, but if you don't know like where that judge is sitting in the sort of game of power that is going on here, you might not know that you need to. And so, yeah, it's actually not as hard to get information on a lot of government officials, but it's hard to know which ones you need that information on and what to do with it, in my experience.
Yeah, so with all of that, and especially with Ren just brought up, what's the timeline, or like a reasonable timeline of expectation to gather that kind of information, both with someone who's public and someone who's private? Is it reasonable to think in 6 months you can get information to start a campaign, or would it take at least a year? Like, what's the timeline for that?
I mean, I think that part of it is like you don't need to know everything about your landlord all at once, or about like a public official all at once. Like I think that it's something that sometimes people do is they think they need to the research is just like auxiliary to like the campaign that you're running. So I think it's getting enough information to like pick like a place to put pressure on, right? So like like with these judges, right? Like we don't have to know everything about them, but we as long as we know like where like one of their houses is, or like where one of their offices is, or like if there is a conflict of interest, like we can start there and then keep researching, and like as the campaign like goes on, like you're gonna find out more information anyways. So I hope that kind of answers that. I think it's like usually it's like an ongoing thing, and you keep adding your sort of like knowledge to it. Christy. Oh, I'm sorry. Mac. And then
yeah, I was just going to speak directly to Charlene's question. For HTU, I don't know what other unions do, but we mainly just want the landlord's address, their place of business, sometimes the management office's address. And those locations are for really like what Mitch was talking about, targeting, like even escalation in some cases. The address is mainly for delivering the demand letter. And then if they don't concede to the demands, if they don't accept their responsibility, then the escalation occurs, and that's sometimes picketing their place of business, picketing their home, letting their neighbors know what a fucking douchebag they are. So I don't, that stuff, depending, of course, hiding behind LLCs and shit is annoying, but for the most part, we don't, I guess we do not use a lot of their information besides like stuff that is generally publicly available, barring them hiding. So
Cool. Christy?
I was just going to say it really all depends on exactly what research you're doing on who you're doing it on and how much information you're requiring. Private is obviously going to take you a little bit longer because it's a little harder to get private information than it is to get public information. Bodies of people, more people you throw at the issue, there are more information you can find out in a quicker manner. So if you organize together and you get multiple people doing the same research and you keep in contact with each other, the length of time does get cut down. So if you're doing something where you need an immediate answer, throw more people at it. If it's something that is less time sensitive than what you're dealing with right at that moment, you can take longer to do the research. There's a lot of variables in the length, in the amount of time for all of this stuff. But definitely, the more people that you throw on to your research, the quicker you're going to be able to get that. If it's for a campaign for like political stuff, you could run, depending on exactly what the issue is that you're dealing with. I would say, to be safe, 3 to 6 months is probably the amount of time that you want to take, so that you can get every ounce of information you can possibly find. So that's for political stuff.
Cool. Yeah, super helpful. And Mac put something really important in the chat. Sometimes tenants have personal knowledge of either the management staff or the landlord that can help, and that's like really important. It's also important because, like, you know, you're not just trying to like find like knowledge on your landlord, like you're trying to like build a union or a tenant association, and like that's a way of like getting people to like step up within the tenant association. So yeah, if there are any more questions, we can keep answering them, or we can move on to another section. All right, Red. So, you know, Esteban sort of went into some of the way that you, or the reasons why you power map. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of starting to do research on your landlord and like how you get started and what are some of the places that you can look to find out like your landlord's name or like where he lives, or you know, and sort of some of the places you can like apply your tenant union can apply pressure on your landlord. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm going to share my screen. I didn't really make a slideshow. I just made one slide because I'm like really lazy, but whatever, it might be helpful. Share, I guess. Sorry, I'm also trying to learn how to use Zoom. All right, well, whatever. So what,
You want to share the slide with me and wait?
yeah, I can do. It's not actually not that. All right. So what are some of the things that people think we'd want to use? What sort of information would people want to know about their landlord to start like sort of a campaign? And you can just unmute yourself because I'm going to figure out how to share my slide while you talk.
I'm trying to find out who are the other people involved in his LLC, because I see some names change every now and then. And even though he pretends to be a loner, he has in like 12 buildings, but there's different names on all of these buildings. So I want to know who these people are. How is he getting that funding? And, you know, maybe shame them too.
Yeah, somebody mentioned investors in the chat, and that's actually in my case, that's what getting on that one news network did. Like, it was the investors sitting at home, like in retirement, that are just kind of collecting your hard-earned you know, labor, cash from your labor, And that's actually how we got to Landlord. He had a 51% stake in all of the buildings. There was still 49% that was other people, and they don't like bad press. So yeah, that's an important consideration. Yeah.
Cool. So can people see my screen? The slide? You can. Okay, cool. Perfect. Yeah, somebody put in the chat, investors. Investors is super important. So this is what I came up with when we were trying to figure out who my landlord was in my building. This is what my tenant association came up with. We got name, address, a phone number to his office and his home phone, because we only had like a phone number that like went to like not even like, it went to like an answering machine, basically the one that like we got, you know, in our building. And then some other things, the other properties that he owns, the investors, like where are they getting their mortgages from, other businesses that your landlord owns, because these are like a good way to like, you can go and like pick it if he owns like for example, like one landlord in Crown Heights owns like this like hippy dippy like yoga studio, and people like went and picketed the yoga studio, and it was like a good way to like apply pressure on them. Political relationships, and also like lobby groups that they're involved in, and then finally social relationships, like what church they go to, are they members of like clubs or like charities or whatever. So, and then, you know, there might be other things too, and if there are, like, feel free to put
Yeah,
those.
1 sec. Sorry, so you mentioned specifically they ran a yoga studio and you sort of picketed that and that put pressure on them. Did that work really well? Because I literally, one of these LLCs that we've been working with, they own a giant yoga studio that is part of that neighborhood. So that is something that we could maybe do. How did that work out for you guys?
It definitely made them like very angry. And I think it was really embarrassing to them because this was around like an eviction defense that got like national sort of like news coverage. So like when people showed up at their like Park Slope yoga studio, and like it wasn't like it wasn't like they're sort of like working class tenants. It was like the middle class people who like, I think they actually like care about like, yeah, it was not effective like by itself, but like in terms of like being a part of a campaign, it was pretty effective.
It was the people that they want to look cool in front of.
Yeah.
You know, it definitely like subtracted from their cool factor. So
and
yeah,
it stopped people from like going to their business. Like that was identified as like a business owned by like bad people.
Well, and yeah, I guess we always want to hit them in the wallet, right? That's where they feel the pain.
Definitely. So, all right. So, you know, you're trying to find out who your landlord is. Where do you start? A good place to start is looking at deeds and mortgages. So in New York City, actually, not New York State, deeds and mortgages are the records in the county clerk's office or the city clerk's office are digitized, and they're on this database called ACRIS. That's not true of like every city or county. When I used to live in Paterson, New Jersey, I had to go to the county clerk's office and like physically like dig through like property records. But it's the same. It's just a little bit like less convenient. So for my landlord, I live at 1308 Prospect Place. You can generally search by, you can definitely search by like address. In New York City, you can also search by property owner. Although, you know, in the chat, Noah, I think from Philly, was talking about how Philadelphia or Pennsylvania has made it so that like you can't search by property owner name anymore. It changes by city, but the best place to find out like information about your landlord is by looking at like mortgages and deeds. So let's take a look at my building. My building's I don't know. Here's an assignment of mortgage. So I don't know. It might be a little bit hard to read, but we can see here. My building is owned by. That's not a good one to look at. My building is owned by. Here we go. A company called Sun Tower Realty. All right, that's a good start. They're at 199 Lee Street. That's a mailbox. But if you dig through these, sometimes you can find things like the owner's the owner's like signature is always on these things someplace. But not that one.
Yeah, signature is crucial. Can't say enough how many times I've actually been able to like put together like documents that like had matching signatures and that pointed me to the LLC, or at least like associated one LLC with another LLC. Yeah, and like because sometimes they'll change their name. Like, I don't know if you guys have run into this before, but like they'll change a letter out of their first or last name just to be able to like avoid being on a database, right?
Yep.
So you go in and you can find they'll sign exactly the same, and then you've made your connection, and like that's what you needed. So
yeah. So here, on page 9 of this like mortgage, I think we have Chaim Zinkowitz, and then if you look through some of these other things, there's like my landlord's name is actually Kalman Zimmerman, and there's a business partner. So we have a name, right? We have a couple of names. Chaim Simkowitz, we have Kalman Zimmerman, and we don't have a real address for them, but we also have here who's giving them, like who's investing in them. So this is GPS Capital Fund LLC is giving them a mortgage, and in one of these property documents, there's an actual address, but it might take but it might take forever to find it. So, anyways, you look at these mortgages, you look at these other like property documents. You can always find people who own the building, and then usually you can find an address, and that address might be for an office. A lot of times in New York, a lot of times it's their house, like the landlord's like house. And then another thing you can do, right? So if you're looking for, we found in this property document, Sun Tower Realty LLC, you can look at the Department of State business search, and every state has a Department of State. Every Department of State has a business search. They're not always super helpful. Sometimes they are, but this one, because almost none of the ones in New York are helpful. This one it doesn't say any like thing, but other cities with like that don't have like 100 years of like tenant unions like organizing against landlords get a little bit lazier, and they don't do as good a job hiding themselves all the time. So you've got your landlord's name, you might have an address. I think Christy said that like LinkedIn was really helpful. And I totally agree. I think that like LinkedIn is like a very good resource for finding out if your landlord owns other businesses. So for example, here's one of the owners of Sun Tower Realty, is this guy Kalman Zimmerman. And he works at a company called Nooklin, which is a big property broker. And that's like all over the city and has an office in our neighborhood. I think his picture used to be on here until we did a march on his office. But so LinkedIn is going to be great for like finding other businesses that your landlord owns, or if you're looking up the LLC, like sometimes landlords will like list their you can sometimes look up the LLC on LinkedIn and find the owner that way. Another important thing is looking for housing violations, and there's a couple different ways to do that. In New York City, because there's pretty like robust like tenant protections, you can go to the Department of like the building department, the Department of Housing Preservation. That doesn't exist in every city. It didn't exist in Patterson, for example. But if we go here, we can look at tax things. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had it pulled up someplace, but so you can generally look at like sorry, you can generally look up like housing violations, and if you're like if like the Department of like Buildings in your city or your county doesn't like do that, you can also go and look through court records. And
oh, sorry, I just knocked you off.
I was trying to stop sharing anyways. And then yeah, and then the last thing I was going to say is like so looking for political like relationships is like pretty easy because you can generally look at like what like politicians your landlord donates to, and political donations are like pretty easy to search on the internet. And yeah, I don't know. I hope that was like less confused. I don't know.
I want to real quick. So I didn't know Maxwell was going to be here from Housing Data Coalition, but I asked him if he would talk a little bit about how they've sort of coalesced some of this information into what is now, like all that stuff that we just showed you. I just have to like, I kind of like to brag about this what we get here in New York. Hold on, let's see. You can go ahead and like introduce yourself, Maxwell. And
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so well, I'm part of the Housing Data Coalition, and yeah, a lot of what we do and our members, which are kind of a mix of just individuals doing this work and some like nonprofit groups and things like that, is to try to take a lot of these techniques that tenants have developed, like a lot of what we just kind of walked through, and try to kind of like abstract it out and try to figure out a way to do it at a larger scale using kind of like data and technology and stuff. So one of our, I don't have screen sharing. So one of our member groups is kind of, oh, great.
Yeah.
So one of our member groups is called Just Fix NYC, and they've built a tool called Who Owns What, which essentially takes all of that data that we were looking at in terms of their deeds and mortgages and things like that, and uses it on a kind of like mass scale across the whole city to find the kind of networks of ownership. So for example, I just punched in the address that that Mitch was showing there, and it finds the kind of constellation of all the properties that have like kind of ties to ownership. So they do this by kind of matching across lots of different open data sets that are available and finding similarities in the names or in like the addresses that they list across different places where they have to register their records and things like that. And so we can find that Suntower Realty is one of the entities, and where one of their business addresses are, or they might have different like managers or officers, and so you can kind of map that out and organize across the properties, but get a kind of sense of all these different buildings that you can kind of look up individually and that sort of thing. So that's kind of one of the things that we try to do is, like take the kind of techniques developed by tenants and like scale them up a little bit using data like this. And It'll definitely depend a lot on where you are and the kind of like open data landscape that exists there, but some version of this, is probably possible in a lot of places. And I know in other places like Philly, there was already a tool shared in the chat here, and in Chicago, they're doing something similar, LA as well. So it's definitely something to kind of explore.
And what's cool for me, like what's cool is that, when Just Fix started out, like they were coming to our meetings, like, and seeing like the kind of questions that we were asking. And I don't know if you saw there on the screen share, but on the right-hand side was just links to like every single government agency. And like, that takes you directly to that address. And like, to go from like trying to like match signatures on a deed to like just having it all like laid out there is like not just like saves time, but like it really like allows us to go even further into like the power mapping and to really dig in. There's another tool also called what does DAP stand for?
Displacement Alert Project. Yeah, I can also show that quickly. That's like using the same sort of idea that we have really like great data on every building in New York City. And so we're able to kind of map all these different indicators. So this is like, again, kind of develop like things that tenants and unions have kind of come up as a risk of displacement and kind of like a high priority for organizing. If there's been like a sale recently, or there's been a lot of construction happening for, like rent evictions and that sort of thing. Also, if there have been past evictions at that location, and you can see, changes in regulated units and kind of help prioritize outreach and kind of just get a better understanding of what's going on in that building as well.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Yeah, it is really amazing. And just to have like a visual of like where are we going to go do outreach today? Like okay, find the red buildings and just like go there and start talking to people and see. So like this, like, I know we've talked mostly about like targets and how we win campaigns, but before you do any of that, like you have to actually be talking to people. And I feel like that gives you like a really like pinpoint accuracy of like where the problems are, like who's the most at risk. But I mean, yeah, so for those of you who actually do like data as a, have that skill set, this is, a lot of these organizations came out of the tenant movement and just out of tenant organizing. Some of them funded by, the city put a lot of funding into these projects because they, essentially we're doing their job for them. Like obviously the government should be paying attention to people getting evicted and people, suffering in the conditions of their apartment, but they saw that we were doing good work, and so they've jumped in to let some other people do that. So yeah, super proud of those of those tools. Thank you, Maxwell, for sharing that. I think everyone, like, if you've had done any organizing before and you see something like that for the first time, it's kind of like, it's just like amazing revelation of what you can do with data. So yeah, so that covers tools.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions, or like do you want to make sure that we're keeping up with folks on Stack too? Projects. Yeah, lots of minds blown over here. I don't think there's anything right now like this in LA, but there's no, I mean, again, like the Who Owns What tool was like, a dude showed up to one of our meetings like years ago and was like, oh yeah, I do data. And then like a couple of years later, like this whole thing has been created. So I'm sure that there are people with these skill sets that maybe haven't thought about using them in this context. And this goes a little bit beyond, like, we're not really necessarily talking about research now at this point. We're talking about like, how do we actually, like, once we've learned how to do the research, how do we make that accessible to like a large number of people, as many people as possible, as many tenants as possible, so that somebody on their phone can actually go and look these things up without having to have like an extensive skill set. That to me is like is how you really scale up base building. Yeah, so we got about, how long do we have? switch 20 minutes?
We've got some people on the stack, Nance, and then Catherine.
Oh, hi. So I just want to mention, so thank you so much. This is phenomenal. I'm going to put in the chat, LA just recently went live with a website that tracks Ellis evictions. Ellis evictions are those evil evictions where it allows owners basically to get rid of RSO tenants by going out of the rental business and like tearing down the building and putting up condos. It's often, a last resort to get rid of long-term tenants. And then I think it's also very important to think big picture. Like, people are asking, how can I get this information? How can I get this information? So years ago in LA, we started a rent registry requirement for rent stabilized units. And that provides a lot of data and a lot of tracking. So I would definitely urge people to also think big picture and to push for more tracking, more registries, all of that. What I'm going to put in the chat only exists because owners have to apply to the city to do those types of projects.
Cool. Catherine?
Just something we've been thinking about doing research on are affordable housing developments, because we've had some issues recently and like long-term issues with the Hillside Via tenants in Chinatown. Like some affordable housing developments don't fall under these like emergency protections or other rent control that we've been passing because of their federal funds. So wondering if others have been doing research on affordable housing specifically.
I'm gonna have insight into that. Actually, one of the I don't know that we're going to get to it today, but one of the examples that I always use in terms of like how research can be useful is it's Carmel Realty Partners or Carmel Partners. They emptied out like a whole like basically like a student housing at Fuller Theological Seminary, right? It was right outside of Fuller. They also have all these contracts all over California for affordable housing that they never actually like fulfill. And I didn't like that's the situation where like they were applying for a contract here across the street from me, and I didn't have access to that information or didn't know how to get access to that information until it had already like passed. Now we're actually in court with them and like still trying to like stop it, but yeah, I mean, you're gonna find like there's like an interplay with like development, like new development and landlords, and they tend to not always do it at the same, like you're not gonna see both things. The name of the firm. So Fuller Theological Seminary, the name of the landlord was Carmel Partners, or Carmel Realty Partners. They're also like investors. And this was like maybe 2017 that they just like evicted everybody in this huge like that's exactly the people that you're talking about. Yeah. See this? This is what ATUN is for right here. Because like these are things that like you're not really going to be able to. I found two articles about how they weren't like actually complying with the registry, like with one particular municipality that had like a requirement for for rent regulation to be for them to register, and it's like not that much money, but like they were purposefully like withholding that. And here the conversation that we were having at the community board level was, oh no, these are like they're going to provide affordable housing for residents, and like they're going to be great landlords, and like we want to bring them into our community. And like the perfect counter to that would have been these evictions and the fact that they don't follow through on their commitments to the government when they do make those commitments. Like that would have actually made the difference in how they were perceived and how like the elected officials here perceived them, because they were selling themselves as something totally different. So these are like very real, like immediate things that like can really make a difference in our campaigns and in the way that we win or not win. So yeah, that's exciting. That's I actually just had like a one of those moments as well, because it's even in New York, people don't know who those people are, but you guys know them. So, was there others on stack?
Yeah, Mac in the chat was asking, how do you get bank documents? I haven't really, like, for private landlords, I haven't really been able to like get a copy of like bank documents other than like what's filed with the county clerk. So like mortgages, for example. But yeah, I don't know. Oh, I'm sorry, Harriet.
I would have to suggest, I don't quite think that the bank is going to get out personal information, like how much they're paying for their mortgages, but overall property ownership is something that they can give out for information. It goes along with, it's in each town or city, there's information acts where you can go to the banks and the city clerk's office and your local code enforcement office, if you should have one. And that's all matter of public record. So it doesn't actually cost you anything to get, at least not here in Vermont. But those are a few of the places that you can go to that they will give you the information without it being obtrusive or against anybody's rights to find out.
Cool. Red.
Yeah, this is pretty much directly about that. So this one isn't directly related to eviction defense, but it works for tenant union organizing as well. Yeah, a lot of this information is available at the courthouse, and if you just go to your city's courthouse and put in records requests for, especially if there is something like an eviction, if you can just put in a records request to get that, like a copy of that complaint, that a lot of the time will have information both about the tenant and the landlord that then you can use to do whatever. That's actually, again, the housing justice project we have here, that's a lot of what we've been doing is we just go to the courthouse every week with a list of the people who are up for evictions, and then we make records requests on all of them, and then we get information not just on how to contact them, but on every one of those landlords. And that actually is a really useful tool if any of you don't know about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually talked about this when we were preparing for this training. I was talking about how there's databases in court that you have to physically go to the court for, even in New York, and you can't necessarily look up, like, you can look up like the docket, or you can look up like the case itself. You may not necessarily be able to get all the documents for the case, but this is actually how they do tenant blacklists, right? Like somebody goes to the court, they pull up all the non-payment cases, and then they write down docket after docket after docket, and then they get people's names. They don't care if if you sued the landlord or the landlord sued you or whatever. They just want to know that you've been to court with the landlord. Then you end up on a blacklist, and people get paid to do that. So this is a good way to find out, and especially now that we're dealing with what's going to be an insane increase in in eviction filings. Like, if you want to know where the real trouble is and which landlords are acting are the worst actors in this process, like, it's easy to do once you have have it laid out for you like that in docket numbers and all the court proceedings. So I don't necessarily know how court works in other places, but
Well, yeah. This is something I've noticed too. Is if you do get the court records for all these things, like for evictions and complaints, you do see a lot of the same names popping up, right? It's the same landlords, and so it does help you determine maybe some targets and some information about those specific landlords, about like places where they might need more organization, and also that gives you a list of tenants there who might be more willing to help organize there, because obviously they are not friends with the landlords. So yeah.
And this is for me also like a significant, at least early on, how I figured out where we would why we would do outreach in a particular building. So you go to for us it's HPD, like the city, like where the violations are, and like it tells you what apartments have violations. So like you get into that building, you go to that apartment that's got all the the long list of complaints, and now you have a potential outreach opportunity. So in all of these things, like if you start noticing certain names, or you're researching one thing and something else keeps coming up, you may want to pay attention to that so that you can, so that you can actually use that for your organizing. Like if there's a landlord that's doing all sorts of bad stuff in your neighborhood, like you want to know who they are. They're already popping up. So that's what the research is for. Like it's on its own, like it's like I was telling Mitch the other day that I go into these like rabbit holes and suddenly it's like 4 a.m. and I'm like, oh my gosh, and they went to high school with so and so, and like just finding out like all sorts of like scandalous information about a landlord, and that it's useful. It can be useful, but I'm just like I'm a nerd that way. So really, what we're here for is to be able to grow our tenant unions, right, and to build tenant power, build political power, and like win some shit for ourselves and for our neighbors. That's my take here. I think we probably will finish up a little bit early. I'm supposed to finish at 5, but this has been really fun. Does anyone have any other comments or questions?
I think
Good.
I just wanted to share. We used I forget what the actual tool is, but it was one of those county records indexing websites, and we were part of an action that took place at a courthouse. Unfortunately, not as cool as locking it down with bike chains, but and we looked up the evictions that were taking place on that day at the courthouse, and we found it was at one complex, and so we went and campaigned canvassed at that complex to try and, to find the people being evicted and try and maybe get them on board, but also just to see, hey, there's probably some fucked up shit here. And there was. People's water bills were being doubled and their rent was going up, and pretty much everybody was down to be yeah, fuck these people. So that's another sort of I guess networking opportunity, maybe workload opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm going to put my email and our union email in the chat. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. There we go. All right. So if you have any specific questions, I don't know that I'm not going to say that we can absolutely figure something, figure out your stuff, but if you're having trouble finding an LLC or even just finding what resources that you need, we're like I said, Mitch is kind of super good at Google, and you'd be amazed what you could find on Google. So we might be able to help. Give us throw us a line, and also just in general, if you for sure, if you come across somebody that you see has businesses or properties or developments happening in New York, and it's somebody that that you want to target, definitely contact us, because we're all about that cross-country coalition building. I think it's one of the things that we're going to need to be doing on a massive scale. So, oh, thank you, Matt. Anybody else have anything? Is everyone going to the point of unity discussion? Yeah. I'm not going to get to go today. I have to, but I'll be there tomorrow.
What is the points of unity discussion?
The point of unity is the document that is the founding document for ATUN. It's sort of just basic concepts of what it means to be autonomous, and sort of how we want to how we want our member unions to I guess sort of to relate to each other, and to basically it's not, I wouldn't say rules, but just it's like a what do you call it, a constitution essentially, and it's really good. Actually it's one of the first times that I've read through a whole document like that where I was oh yeah, they get it, they understand. Whoever wrote this understands. So yeah, I encourage you to go to that discussion if you're affiliating, or if you're thinking about affiliating with ATUN. I think it's really important that you can be at the start of all of it. Like you'll look back in like 5 or 10 years and be really happy that you went to this to this convention for that reason. So
Cool. Nancy.
Yes, thank you again so much. This is so incredible. So I'm just wondering if you have any practical tips, like Alex put in the chat something about a spreadsheet. So when you're kind of flooded with all this information, and particularly if it's new to you and it's under stressful circumstances, do you have any like kind of like practical tips?
So like what I do is the slide that I showed that was like just sort of like name, address, investors, other businesses, other properties, and so on. Like I just make that and I fill that in. Cause like it's really easy to like get a lot of information, but having sort of like a rubric or something, like a schedule of like what is like the basic information that you need. I think it helps me out, I think. But I know that it's not like as advanced as maybe like what you're asking for.
yeah, as far as spreadsheets, like I suck at spreadsheets, but anyone that I've ever seen that does like really solid, good research has like mastered, obviously like Google Sheets, and like I hear Airtable is a really like great spreadsheet sort of thing. I'm not familiar hardly at all. I'm actually about to do a training on it for like a political campaign that I'm trying to like help out with. So I do love a beautiful spreadsheet that's already been done for me though. Like it really makes this process easier. Sortable. Oh yeah, I've heard of that too. Oh wait, Airtable. Sortable. No, Sortable is an app. That's not for the same thing, but yeah. All right, y'all. So got through it, right? It's a lot. Like research is like a really huge topic to try to cover in like a short amount of time when like you've got people, 30 something people from 30 different places. I hope that it was helpful and useful for y'all. And thanks for coming. Really appreciate your presence and your questions and your comments and interaction on a weekend afternoon. Yeah. That good? Everyone good? Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much, y'all.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank y'all.
facilitating.
Thanks.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Much love to all of you. Peace.
I actually want to say, while we were sort of wrapping up, I would use some of the tips that you suggested and looked up the name again of this one landlord that I've been struggling with for like 2 or 3 days. And I think I actually just found his Facebook about 5 minutes ago.
Nice.
So thank you so much. You've immediately helped me out.
Perfect. That's really great to hear.
Yeah, I'll see y'all tomorrow or later today.
Yeah.
So this is the whole thing is finished for today. Is that correct?
No, there's I mean.